New South Wales Government will deliver a $5 billion boost to the state's childcare sector over a decade under the state budget. The policy will see 47,000 new places open across the state, with private operators being paid to expand or build new centres. The low number of available slots has prompted the state government to intervene in what has normally been an area run by federal government subsidies. Modelling shows at least 35.2% live in childcare deserts, where there are as few as one place per 7 children.
Today's investment of around $5 billion over the next 10 years, but $775 million over the next 4 years, is an investment in our children, an investment in our family, and an investment in our great state for generations to come. This is a once-in-a-generation reform. It is an area which will drive women's participation, provide great opportunities for families who are struggling with balancing the work and family life struggle.
The changes would see as many as 95,000 women enter or increase their hours in the workforce. For more, joining us live is Georgie Dent, the Executive Director at the Parenthood. Georgie, appreciate your time. Thank you so much. To what extent is childcare a postcode lottery, as Matt Keane described it today? How big a concern has that been?
Oh, look, it is a really significant concern. So we know that about a third of the Australian population live in a childcare desert, which is described as an area where there are more than 3 children for every available position within a 20-minute drive. And so we know that, and that it's a similar proportion here in New South Wales. It's roughly a third of families live in a childcare desert, which means before a child's even born, they're effectively they're having a level of disadvantage baked in. We know that when children have access to quality early learning before they start school, it sets them up for lifelong success.
So how significant is it to see a state government intervene at this level, and how much relief do you expect it to bring to parents and also childcare operators?
Look, it's a huge investment today. It's very significant, I think, as you noted. Generally speaking, the federal government have funded the childcare subsidy, which is the primary subsidy that is available to families, that is in existence to make care and early learning more affordable. But as we know, early learning and care has been very unaffordable for a very long time. And while today there are some very big numbers being put out there, I think what we have to focus on is we need to, at a state and federal level, need to be looking at absolutely everything that we can do to ensure that every single child has got access to quality early learning before they start school. We know that this sets children up for success, but we also know that it is critical to narrowing the gender gap that exists. So we know that women in New South Wales work far less than men in New South Wales do after they reach the age at which most families are having children. Closing that gap is the most efficient way we have of improving productivity. And so I think today it is unusual that we're seeing this from a state government, but it's also welcome. Because what we have seen today, and my understanding is that there is more to be released in the coming days, but we have seen a commitment to looking at access, so ensuring that postcode lottery is fixed. We've seen money being put towards the workforce, which is absolutely critical because early learning has been very hard hit by the pandemic. So we know that staff vacancies in the early learning sector are now double what they were pre-pandemic. This crisis is causing services to be closing rooms, reducing the number of children that they can have. So it's fantastic to see some money being put towards to ensuring that that the workforce can be attracted and retained in this sector. And of course, also that affordability for families is going to be tackled.
Labor has its own childcare overhaul plan at a federal level. Are we getting any signs from the new government that it may be looking at bringing forward the implementation of those plans earlier to try to help with that affordability issue that you talked about, the cost of living pain wrapped into that, of course?
Look, we have seen signs that it would potentially be considered. So I don't think that you could rule it out altogether. One of the issues that we have is, and the New South Wales package goes to this today as well, our early learning and childcare system is incredibly complex. It is very fragmented. The way that services are delivered and funded, it is incredibly complicated, and which is actually one of the reasons why the Parenthood and lots of other organisations have been calling for early learning reform for so long, because we need to make the system easy, and accessible for everybody. So the new Early Education Minister, Dr. Anne Ali, has indicated that she is looking at what can be done. The government has noted that affordability is a huge issue for families. We know that the cost of living pressure on families at the moment is immense and unlikely to ease. Making early learning more affordable is one way of significantly easing the financial pressure on homes and families, but it's not going to be straightforward. I think what is welcome, though, is that for the first time in Australia's history, we have got a Prime Minister who is committed to making universal access to early childhood education and care a legacy of his government. It has been front and centre as a central pledge of the new government's. And there is widespread support for that. The fact that we've got the Liberal state government in New South Wales making the announcements they have today indicates there is now widespread awareness and understanding that getting our early learning settings right is absolutely critical. It is very compelling economically, and it is also fantastic socially, because we know it sets children up for success, it reduces gender inequity. It is a very rare win-win-win.
Georgie, just for people watching at home who might not have children in daycare, they're not forking out all that cash each week to have their children heading to some sort of early childhood learning space, just how bad has it got in terms of affordability in some of the major cities, like in Sydney and Melbourne, for example? Just give us a snapshot of just how expensive that is on a day-to-day basis for families who are trying to get their kids cared for while they do work.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the capital cities, if we're talking Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra, Perth, it is not uncommon to be paying, upwards of $160 a day. In Sydney, there are certainly services where it's about $190 a day before any subsidy. Families are forking out thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just to be able to go to work. So, we had a meeting with the now Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, a week before the election, and some of our members sat down and spoke to him, and one of them made the point. She said going back to work felt like an expensive hobby because their family budget was absolutely smashed just by virtue of having to afford to pay the fees for early learning and care. And that is a situation that will be so common to so many families. And we know that when families are faced with those exorbitant costs, the decision is often made that someone will either stop work or reduce their work really significantly. And almost always it is the woman. And that's why we see that women's financial insecurity is such a critical issue, because the best way to maintain or develop financial security is to stay attached in some form to paid work. And that has been almost impossible for far too many women. It still is almost impossible for far too many women. And that's why we actually have seen the state government in New South Wales and the federal government acknowledge that this is an area that needs to be reformed.
Georgie, Dent, really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.